If you've ever believed that people can change, that a wounded heart can still learn how to trust, then stay with me until the end of this story. And if stories about second chances, quiet courage, and unexpected love mean something to you, like this video and subscribe to the channel. The ending of this one stays with people. When Clara Bennett stepped off the bus in the small town of Red Hollow, she carried one suitcase, a worn coat, and a secret heavy enough to bend her shoulders. The November wind swept dust across the road, and the mountains in the distance looked cold and unwelcoming. She stood there for a moment staring at the paper in her hand. It had one address on it: Blackwood Ranch. She almost turned back, but turning back would mean returning to the city she had spent the last 2 years trying to escape. It would mean the apartment with unpaid rent notices pushed under the door. It would mean memories she could not bear and a life that had already taken too much from her. So she folded the paper carefully, lifted her chin, and started walking. Blackwood Ranch sat a few miles outside town, surrounded by miles of open land. The fences were weathered, the barn leaning slightly to one side, and the house itself looked like it had once been beautiful but had stopped caring. There was no welcoming warmth. No flowers on the porch. No sign of laughter. Only silence. The man who opened the door was taller than she expected. Ethan Blackwood had the kind of face that carried years of sun, storms, and sleepless nights. He looked at her the way a man looks at strangers who usually bring trouble. "You're late," he said. The bus broke down. He glanced at the suitcase. "You know how to cook?" "Yes." "Can you keep to yourself?" Clara hesitated. Usually. That was the first time his eyes really landed on her. He stepped aside. "You can start tomorrow." That was how it began. The town had told her Ethan Blackwood was difficult. A widower. Quiet. Stubborn. Hard as stone. Some said grief had made him cruel. Others said grief had simply made him disappear. Clara learned quickly that both were partly true. Every morning she woke before sunrise. She lit the stove, brewed coffee, kneaded bread, and prepared breakfast. Eggs, biscuits, potatoes, sometimes oatmeal. The kitchen became her shelter. She liked the rhythm of chopping onions, stirring pans, measuring flour. It made the world feel organized again. And every morning Ethan would walk in, boots heavy on the wooden floor, hat in one hand. He would stop when he saw her. At first she didn't understand why. Then one morning she caught her reflection in the kitchen window. She had pinned up her hair. She had borrowed a faded red dress from a church donation box in town. She had put on lipstick. Her chest tightened. It looked deliberate, and maybe it was. Not because she wanted to play games. Not because she was some heartless woman trying to tempt a grieving man. But because for months, years maybe, she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as someone alive. The first time Ethan noticed, he frowned. "You don't need to dress up to cook eggs." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't dressing up for you." "Good." But he left the kitchen with his coffee without meeting her eyes. The next morning she wore a blue dress. The morning after that, she left her hair down. She laughed more, asked him questions, teased him when he answered with one-word replies. In town it became gossip before the week was over. The rancher hired a pretty young woman to cook, and now every morning she was trying to seduce him. Clara heard it at the market. Mrs. Talbot, who sold apples, whispered it just loud enough. "She's too pretty to be there for cooking." Clara kept walking, pretending not to hear. But that night the words sat heavy inside her, because the truth was more complicated. She wasn't trying to seduce Ethan Blackwood. She was trying to remember who she had been before life had broken her apart. Before Daniel, before hospitals, before loss, before blame, she had once been engaged. Daniel was kind, ambitious, and full of plans. They were supposed to be married in spring. Then their daughter Emma was born too early. Emma lived for 6 days. Daniel changed after that. He became distant, bitter. He blamed Clara for the pregnancy complications, though doctors said no one was at fault. A year later he left. And Clara spent the next 2 years carrying grief and guilt like chains. At Blackwood Ranch, every morning when she pinned back her hair or put on lipstick, she wasn't trying to lure a man. She was trying to tell herself she was still here. Still alive. Still worthy of taking up space. Ethan didn't know any of that. He only knew that the woman in his kitchen unsettled him. And that unsettled him because for 3 years after his wife Margaret died, nothing had unsettled him at all. Margaret had died in a riding accident during a storm. Ethan had buried her and then buried everything else too. The laughter, the music, the easy parts of himself. Now suddenly there was Clara. She hummed while cooking. She left windows open. She filled the house with smells of cinnamon and garlic and warm bread. And against all reason, the silence in Blackwood Ranch began to break. One icy December morning, Ethan came in later than usual, limping badly. Clara saw blood on his jeans. What happened? Horse spooked. Sit down. I'm fine. You're bleeding on my floor. That made him stop. She cleaned the cut without asking permission. Her hands were gentle but steady. He watched her. You've done this before. My father was a mechanic. My brothers thought injuries were hobbies. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he asked, why did you really come here? Her hands paused. Needed work. That's not what I asked. She looked up at him. Sometimes people leave places because staying hurts too much. He didn't answer. But something changed after that. The days softened. He started sitting in the kitchen longer after breakfast. He told her where the western fence needed repair, which horse hated strangers, which part of the land caught the best sunset. And Clara, without meaning to, began waiting for the sound of his boots each morning. Still, she knew the town watched. One afternoon at the diner, a man named Wade Mercer cornered her. You know Blackwood doesn't smile for anyone. You must be doing something special. His grin made her skin crawl. I cook breakfast. That what they call it. Ethan walked in just then. He saw Wade's hand too close to Clara's arm. In 2 steps he was there. She said no. Wade laughed. You suddenly protective. Ethan's voice dropped low. Leave. The whole diner went quiet. Wade backed off. On the drive home Clara stared out the window. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Why? He gripped the wheel. Because people think they can decide who you are without knowing you. Her throat tightened. He understood more than she thought. Winter deepened. Christmas came with snow. Clara found an old box of ornaments in the attic. She decorated the living room while Ethan was out. When he returned, he stood in the doorway staring at the tree. I thought you might hate it, she said quietly. He stepped closer. Margaret's favorite ornament, a little glass bird, hung near the top. I haven't opened this box since she died. I'm sorry. He swallowed hard. No, he said. I think she'd be glad it's out. That night they sat by the fire. And for the first time Ethan told her about Margaret. He talked about how she sang terribly while cooking. How she loved thunderstorms. How she always wanted children but they never had the chance. Clara listened. Then she told him about Emma. The words came out broken at first. Then all at once. And when she cried, Ethan didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. For 2 people who had spent years drowning in private grief, that quiet companionship felt enormous. But peace never lasts without being tested. In January Daniel arrived. Clara saw him from the kitchen window and felt the blood drain from her face. He stepped out of a polished car wearing the same expensive coat, the same careful smile. I've been looking for you. Ethan was outside repairing a gate. He saw Clara freeze and walked toward the house. What does he want? Daniel glanced at Ethan, annoyed. This is private. Clara's voice was colder than she felt. Say what you came to say. Daniel sighed. I made mistakes. I know that. But I've changed. She stared at him. You left me when I could barely get out of bed. I was grieving too. You blamed me for our daughter dying. He looked away. I was angry. You were cruel. Ethan stayed silent beside her. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Is this why you're here? Playing house with some rancher. Before Ethan could speak, Clara stepped forward. No, I'm here because I finally stopped believing I deserved to be punished forever. The words surprised even her. Daniel left angry, but after he drove away, Clara fell apart. I thought I was stronger. You are, Ethan said. No, if I were strong, seeing him wouldn't still hurt. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Strength isn't when it stops hurting. Strength is when you don't go back. That night neither of them slept much. The next morning Clara made breakfast as always. But her hands trembled. Ethan came in and stood there. You don't have to prove anything here. She blinked. I know. Then why do you look scared? Because she was. Because the truth had become impossible to ignore. She had fallen in love with him. Not in the dramatic way stories usually tell it. It happened in pieces, in shared silences, in the way he remembered she liked extra sugar in coffee, in the way he listened, in the way he stood beside her when she felt small. And that frightened her more than Daniel ever had. Because losing this would hurt. A week later she packed her suitcase. Ethan found it by the door. "What's this?" "I think I should go." "Why?" "Because I came here to heal, not to depend on someone." His jaw tightened. "You think that's what this is?" "I don't know what this is." He stepped closer. "I do." Her heart pounded. "Then tell me." His voice was rough. "You make this house feel alive again. You make mornings matter. And every day I've been trying not to need that." Tears filled her eyes. "Ethan, I loved Margaret," he said. "I always will. But loving her didn't end my life. I just thought it did." Clara could barely breathe. He reached for her hand. "I don't want you to stay because you have nowhere else to go. I know. I want you to stay because when you're here, I remember how to be human." She laughed through tears. "That's a very rancher way of saying something beautiful." He smiled. A real smile this time. And for Ethan Blackwood, that was almost a miracle. Spring arrived slowly. The snow melted. Grass returned. The air softened. Clara stayed. Not as a ghost hiding from the past. Not as a woman trying to seduce a lonely man. She stayed as herself. And the town, as towns sometimes do, adjusted. Mrs. Talbot brought pies. Children from neighboring ranches came for supper. People stopped whispering. They started seeing. Months later Ethan found Clara standing at the fence at sunset. "What are you thinking about?" She looked out over the land. "How strange it is. I came here because I thought my life was over. And now I think maybe it was waiting for me to begin again." He slipped his hand into hers. "There are wounds that never fully disappear. There are empty chairs in every human heart." Emma would always be part of Clara. Margaret would always be part of Ethan. Love had not erased grief. It had simply taught them grief was not the end of the story. A year later the kitchen looked different. There was laughter now. There were muddy boots by the door. There was music. And every morning Ethan still came in before sunrise. Only now when Clara turned from the stove, he kissed her forehead and stole a piece of toast. One morning she caught him smiling. "What?" He shook his head. "Just thinking." "About what?" "The whole town said you were trying to seduce me." She laughed. "And were they wrong?" He stepped closer. "No. They were wrong about why." She looked at him. "And why was that?" "Because you weren't trying to make me fall for you." "What was I doing?" He touched her cheek gently. "You were teaching both of us how to live again. And maybe that is the part worth remembering. Sometimes people arrive in your life looking like trouble when really they are carrying the same broken pieces you are. Sometimes healing does not look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like coffee before sunrise. Like warm bread. Like staying. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that life can begin again even after the hardest losses, like the video and subscribe to the channel. And remember this, what broke your heart may shape you, but it does not get to decide how your story ends.